All right, so this is the video on calculating model equations to best fit a set of data. We're going to do this primarily using the graphing calculator. I'm going to insist you get out a separate sheet of paper, and at the top of that sheet of paper write down calculator steps. There's a lot of them, probably about 20 altogether. And as long as you have this in your notes, I'll let you use this on a quiz or a test that we may have over this. All right, so we're going to come back to that in just a second. About 95% of this problem is going to be done with the calculator. We're going to start by graphing a scatter plot for these XY coordinates from the table here. And you can see I've already labeled the x-axis. You need to label the x-axis as altitude, because that's what they say in the problem. And you need to make sure you write that in thousands. And you need to understand that when we have 5 here for x, that actually stands for 5,000 feet. 10 is 10,000, 15 is 15,000, so on and so forth. And then our y column I'm labeling as air pressure, and that's measured in PSI. And then across the x-axis, I've counted by 5s, and the y-axis I've counted by 2s. There's not necessarily a right or wrong by what you count by, but we do want to make sure we use most of the x-axis and most of the y-axis so that we get a fair representation when we graph these points. And then go ahead and plot all of those points. I'm going to do it here in just a second. It does not have to be perfect, but we want to get them as close as possible. So your point should look something like this. It's not quite a straight line. It's really more of a curve. And I'm going to go ahead and sketch a curve that either goes through all those points or gets really close. And you should recognize this function as an exponential function because it's decreasing at a quicker and quicker rate. And I will tell you all the problems we're going to be doing today are going to be exponential to simplify things just a little bit. Pause the video as you need to. But number 2, we're going to write the equation of the curve of best fit. So we need to come up with an equation for that curve right there. Here's where we're going to use the calculator. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reset the calculator's memory. A lot of times you end up putting weird settings in the calculator when you go through these problems, so it's always good to start with a fresh slate. So to reset the memory, you're going to hit second, plus sign. So second, plus sign, and then you're going to choose 7. So second, plus sign, and then we're going to go down to 7 for reset. We're going to reset all RAM, and then choose number 2. So write those steps. Second, plus sign, and then it's 7 for reset. And then 1 for all RAM, and then 2 for reset. And then we're ready to enter the data. So to do that, you're going to press the Stat button, which is right here kind of in the upper middle of the calculator. And you're going to choose number 1 for Edit. And then you see List 1 and you see List 2. Our X values are going to go in List 1. So the first number is 0. Type in 0, hit Enter. Guys, I can't stress this enough. This is probably the most important step, the place where most of the mistakes happen. Make sure you enter that data correctly. If you get an error message later on, more than likely it's because you entered the data incorrect. So you should notice we have 11 values in for L1, so we should have 11 values in for L2. So fast forwarding a little bit, and then notice my two lists are even at the bottom. Both have 11 terms. So we've now entered the data. Our next step is we're going to get the scatter plot that we graphed by hand to show up on the calculator. So to do this, we're going to go to y equals, and then we're going to scroll up and highlight and then bold plot 1. So I'm going to choose y equals, top left corner. I'm going to scroll up to where plot 1 is blinking and then hit enter, and then scroll down to make sure it's actually highlighted. And then finally, to actually get the points to show up, you're going to hit zoom number 9. So zoom is in the top middle of the calculator. And we're going to scroll down to 9, or we can just hit 9. Either way works. And then there is your scatter plot. This is a step that technically can be skipped, but I always like to have the points in there before we come up with the equation. All right, so now comes the good stuff. We're going to determine the equation that best fits this data. So to do this, we're going to follow the steps. We're going to press Stat. We're going to scroll right to Calc. And then we're going to choose, I believe it's 0 for exponential, since this is an exponential function. I think it's actually called EXP REG, exponential regression. So let's follow those steps. Stat, scroll to the right to Calc, and then we're going to scroll all the way down. I want to make sure, yeah, the 0 is EXP reg. So that's Stat, scroll right to Calc, and that's 0. Depending on your calculator, if you've got a newer calculator, you're not going to have to enter 4 or 5 times. My calculator is an older version, so I hit enter once. Oh, nope, this is actually doing the same thing your calculator probably will. So you have to keep pressing enter basically until you get to calculate, and then hit enter one more time, and it should calculate an equation for you. If you're not getting this, go back, check your data. If you're getting an error message that says something like domain mismatch, then you've definitely got a mistake when you entered your data. But the A value is 15.15, and the B value is about 0.957. You should recognize that as exponential function form, and that's the answer to number 2. That's the equation, the curve of best fit. Lastly, what we're going to do with our calculator before we can answer the questions is actually the biggest step here is we're going to get that equation into y equals. We do not want to type in this answer right here into y equals. It's not a very accurate answer. We want this entire all of these decimals typed in. So instead of actually writing down all those decimals and then going to y equals to type them in, you can follow a few steps. So first, go to y equals. So starting off here in y equals, you're then going to press the button that is labeled vars, which is kind of in the middle of the calculator. It's right here next to the clear key underneath your arrow pad. So we're going to press vars, and then we're going to scroll down to number 5 for statistics. I'm going to select that, and then we're going to scroll right to where it says EQ. And then finally, we can finish this off by choosing number 1 for EQ or for equation. We'll do that one more time. Y equals vars number 5, and then scroll to the right to EQ. And number 1 reg EQ is actually what it's called. So you hit enter, it puts that entire equation in, and now you should be able to hit the graph button. And you should get a curve that goes through most, if not all, of those points. And this is ultimately going to help us get all of our answers. So looking over here now at the questions, question 3 just wants us to find y when x equals 17. This you should be kind of familiar with. We're going to hit second graph, and I've got it written over here to look at the table. And we just want to find where x equals 17, so I'm going to scroll all the way down and get your corresponding y value. And then more importantly, we want to answer the question, what does it represent in this problem? Well, remember, going back to the beginning, x is the altitude in thousands, and y is the air pressure. So this simply means at 17,000 feet, the air pressure is 7.18 psi, or pounds per square inch. Skipping over number 4 for a second, when we look at number 5, now they're saying if you are 1,000 feet above the ground, what is the air pressure? So they give us x. You got to remember, 1,000 feet corresponds to x equals 1. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at our table. So we're going to scroll back up to where x equals 1 in our table and see that the corresponding y value is 14.5 psi. And then finally, number 4, we're going backwards here, so we have to kind of estimate. They give us the y value of 6. We want to find the x value that makes this true. So we kind of have to scroll. It looks like the y value is decreasing as the x value is getting bigger. So we're going to keep scrolling down until this number gets right around 6. And it looks like right about 21, maybe a little bit more than 21. But we're just going to round to the nearest whole number and say 21,000 feet. So at 21,000, I'm going to put plus feet because it's a little bit more. The air pressure is approximately 6 pounds per square inch. So keep those steps. You're going to repeat those steps, and then I want you to do the China imports problem. I'm going to kind of answer some of the questions as you go. I would encourage you, though, to pause it and do as much as you can. And if you need to see some of the work as you go, you can hit play and see some of this. So here in about 10 seconds, I'm going to show you some of the first answers to the problem. All right, so here's about what your scatter plot should look like. And then your curve, something like this. I counted about 1s on the x-axis. Notice that x represents the years after 1985. Here in about 10 seconds, I'm going to give you the equation of the curve of best fit for the data. Again, follow those steps in the calculator. See if you can do this on your own before I give the answer here in a couple seconds. All right, so those are the values I got in the calculator for my equation. Let me bring that back. And that's the answer to number 2. I'm not too picky how you round. I usually two decimal places, but remember, do not put this in your calculator, you're going to follow those steps that we talked about earlier to put that entire decimal into y equals. So it's y equals, clear out the last one, y equals vars number 5, scroll to the right to EQ. Graph it. Looks something like that. Or actually more like that. Once I fixed my window. But now we can answer these questions pretty quickly. Determine y when x equals 8.5. One thing you can do, since 8.5 doesn't show up, we can press the second window button. So when we go to second window, this is actually a really useful place to go, and we can go to change in table. That's what that triangle table means, and this is what we can count by. So I want to count by 0.5s so that when we go back to the table, second graph, we can find 8.5. And then when x equals 8.5, y is 39.263. And in context, remember x equals 8.5. We're talking about years after 1985. So if we take 1985 and add 8.5 to it, we get 1993.5. So it's really halfway through 1993. And then the final question, estimate what year and month China imports would be at 5 billion. This is our y value. So again, this is just an estimation. So we need to go in our table and find where y is 5. So we've got to go back here. And it looks like somewhere between 1 and 1.5. So x equals 1 is talking about the year 1986. And it looks like it's pretty early on in 1986. This one specific, it kind of wants you to give a guesstimate. So we're just going to say in February 1986, China imports would be 5 billion.